You are now co-host, and I'm off mic.
Thanks, Ginny. Jasmine, just so you know, your camera's still off, which is fine. Hi. Hello to everyone joining. We're going to wait just a few minutes. We have one participant who we're hoping will join soon, and we're just going to wait for a few more of you to join, and we will start in a few minutes. Hi again to everyone who's joining. We will be starting very shortly. It looks like Sada is not here just yet, so we will get started and hope that she's going to join us shortly. Okay, so one of the participants is a bit late, but no problem. Right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for an important conversation on centering mental health in displacement. My name is Annie Slemrod. I am Middle East editor at the New Humanitarian and the director and editor of the just published Lebanon Displacement Diaries, in which 10 people tell their stories in their own words of their displacement during the war between Israel and Hezbollah. Before I continue, just on a quick technical note, I'm guessing that those of you who are listening in will have lots of questions for our amazing participants. So you can feel free to stick those in the chat throughout the conversation, and we'll reserve some time at the end to get to them. I'm going to do very, very short introductions and then let people introduce themselves because they are probably better at that than me. So I'm joined today by Zainab Shamoun, project coordinator of the Lebanon Displacement Diaries, Jasmine Lillian Diab, director of the Institute for Migration Studies at the Lebanese American University, Mona Saouli, a clinical psychologist who's a mental health and psychological support officer at the ICRC in Lebanon. And hopefully we will soon be joined by Sarah Mawed, a gender-based violence protection officer at the Danish Refugee Council. She should be here soon. We're going to jump into talking to each other and me asking some questions shortly. So you can hear from our speakers, all of whom are not only experts on in their own right, but also were impacted in different ways by the war and displacement crisis in Lebanon. So just really a quick few words from me first for background. Last week marked 6 months since the start of the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. And while November 27th, 2024 did mean that around most, I guess, of the around 1 million people who were displaced during the past year, and especially the final 3 months of the war while Israel was heavily bombing in Lebanon and invaded parts of the south, killing more than 4,000 people. While that ceasefire did mean that many people could come home, in many ways, the war has not ended. Israel is still regularly bombing. It still has troops in Lebanon. And even if the violence had ended, the experience of displacement, of figuring out what to pack, if you should pack, of trying to work out if a bomb is close enough that you need to leave, of constantly checking WhatsApp to see if your house has been destroyed, or finding a shelter or a rented house, or in some cases, the sidewalk to sleep on, is an experience that continues to ripple far after a crisis, I'm going to put ends in quotation marks here. We often talk about a war, after a war, about reconstruction, about getting people back to work, about getting home. Actually, around 90,000 people in Lebanon still haven't been able to do that. But what's often, I think, too often, in my opinion, ignored in political discourse, in media, and in aid, which I'm assuming many of you watching are from that world, are the deep and lasting emotional repercussions of this experience of trauma, and especially in a place like Lebanon, which in many ways has been in some sort of crisis, whether it's war, economic collapse, water shortages, lacks of electricity since the start of the civil war in 1975. That's a long time. I think that's enough for me, as our panelists have a lot to share. Hopefully we will talk about their experiences and hopefully give you some lessons on what this means for displacement and in other protracted crises at a time when aid cuts are really threatening this work. UNHCR announced just last week that it was phasing out funding, including mental health care for Syrian refugees in Lebanon, as well as some other things because of its latest budget cuts. And as you all probably know, the aid world is facing slashing budgets across the board. So thank you, everybody. Sada, who's not here yet, but hopefully will be soon. Mona, Jasmine, and Zainab for joining us today. Let's get started. We're gonna jump in. Zainab, I'm gonna ask everybody when you speak first, if you could maybe just briefly introduce yourself and explain your connection to the recent displacement crisis, either personal, professional, really whatever you want. So Zainab, you were the coordinator for the Lebanon Displacement Diaries. We know each other pretty well by now, which means you helped select the 10 participants that told their stories. You spoke with many of them yourself. For those who haven't read the diaries yet, I would recommend that you all do. What way did the topic of mental health sort of come through? What did you feel coming through in their stories and in their conversations?
Thank you, Annie, and hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm so excited to be here in this panel because it started from a project that is very much dear to my heart. First, let me introduce myself briefly. It's Zainab. I'm the project coordinator of the project. I struggle to introduce myself through my profession, but I would go with the storyteller. Participatory storytelling and collaborative storytelling is something that we've been working on over the past couple of years, Annie and I, and with the new Humanitarian. And you would know, like, it is something of everything that I do, whether it's research, journalism, or development. And for me, it is not one thing that you do. It actually decides who gets seen, who gets heard, and who gets forgotten. And this kind of a journalism unpacks so much layers and aspects of the human life that traditional reporting and fast reporting often overlook. And in this project specifically, we unpacked the aspect of mental health in times of crisis and displacement. So as you can tell, the project is very dear to my heart. I could not see it as a simple job. It was something that I actually lived to, because for the record, the Displacement Diaries brings together the stories of 10 different people across Lebanon who went through displacement. And they tell the story through their own words, through their own photos, through their own voices. Whatever they think it is important element to the story, it is included in there. And for me, I am also based in South Lebanon. I was based in South Lebanon during the war, and I'm still based in South Lebanon currently with all the uncertainty that is happening. I'm still trying to get back to my normal life. And that's why, like, working on this project and having the pleasure to meet those 10 different people was for me both cathartic and rewarding. I remember when you approached me with this idea, I was like, yes, I want to do it because I felt during displacement, it was very hard for me to take the space to reflect on what was happening. The war, the escalation of the war was very abrupt, and suddenly we found ourselves having to move, having to find a place to stay in, having to maintain our needs. I felt this sense of responsibility towards myself and toward my family, and that was a lot of burden to our hearts and little poor brains. So in that project, I had the opportunity opportunity to actually visit these people, visit their homes, whether their original homes for those who were lucky to go back, or the temporary homes and shelters, because many of them unfortunately lost their homes. We talked about so many things that go beyond the war itself, about their life before displacement, about their memories, about their families, about their kids, their pets, their gardens, about the items that they care a lot about. So we could feel like this emotional connection of the people to their homes that goes beyond to what we hear in the headline about war. The aspect of mental health specifically was evident through so many factors. First, as part of the conversation, we had to ask about the aid that they were receiving while they were displaced, and if there were any needs that were not actually addressed. And surprisingly, almost none of them mentioned psychosocial support, except for one participant. Her name is Riham. She is a Syrian refugee, a mom of three. She was displaced from Beqa and lived in an olive grove for 10 days and then found her way to a shelter. And she mentioned that she received psychosocial support sessions from an NGO, and she actually framed it as the best thing that happened to her during the displacement. She benefited a lot on a personal level, like it helped her how to deal with her emotions, her anger, how to embrace her kids as well, because what she went through was really horrific, and she needed that kind of support. But others did not mention that they received this kind of aid, but you can tell from their words and from their emotions that there is an immense need for psychosocial support. I don't want to be speaking on behalf of the participants or analyzing what they said, but you can feel that there is a real internal struggle and a need to grieve and process in their own stories. For example, we have Noor, one of the participants, one of the stories, whom we used the quote from her as a title for this session. The safe place was the one I left. And in Noor's story, you can sense her longing to the past life and her rejection to what happened, like to losing. She lost her house. She is a newly married woman. She couldn't live in her new house that she really cared of every single detail in. And she was living this paradox of having to live in a technically safe place in Beirut and seeing like many people are going on with the normal life. But for her, it was very hard because her normal life, her safe place was back at home in Sur. We also have like Abu Ali, who is an adorable grandpa in his 70s. He lost his home in Kfarkila, and he is now living in an apartment miles away from his land that he hasn't left before. And he says, and here I want to use his exact words because I feel it would tell better what he felt. So Abu Ali says, I've never been that still in my entire life. For my whole life, even if I didn't have to work one day, I would go outside from morning till noon, come back to pray, have lunch, go out again, and come back home at sunset. I don't like staying inside, but I didn't have a choice. And he doesn't have a choice until now. And this can sound like a regular sentiment that he is sharing, but it actually reflects the drastic change in his lifestyle for someone who's used to be outdoors, who's used to be in the land. Suddenly, at this age, he's in a very small apartment in a place that he does not belong to. We could also recognize from the stories this urge for the persons to show and tell that we are strong no matter what. Like we Lebanese people, we always say that we are known for our resilience, but we are not resilient. But sometimes we feel like, oh, we've been through so many crises and we can stand still anyway. So you could also feel this tension in the story. Like Yasmina, a mother of three, she is in her 50s. She says, like, I have to be strong for my kids. I have to push it through, but I'm tired at the same time. People at this age also they are longing for stability in Lebanon. And I can go on and on with examples from the stories, but all of this like reflected this immense need for psychosocial
Mm,
support, and and it was evident that this kind of support is a luxury for many, and it's
yeah.
actually deprioritized in the sector.
Mm. Thank you so much for bringing those sort of pieces of, I know that's hard when the stories are so long and they're so in depth. Um, and some of what you said reminds me, I'll come to you, Mona. I'll let you introduce yourself. As I said, you can do it better than I can. But as you were sort of on the ground, um, helping people coordinating the response for the ICRC, including psychosocial support. Could you tell me sort of what that entailed, or tell everyone actually what that entailed, and also the sort of issues that you were seeing coming up?
Yes, hello everyone. Hello, Anne. I'm Mona Sauli. I'm the MHPSS, the Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Field Officer in Beirut delegation. I'm working with the ICRC the past 6 years, and during the escalation, I was displaced too. So as you know, the ICRC is an organization has experience in working in emergencies and in armed conflict. So what we did during the escalation, we developed a multidisciplinary approach to work all together to respond to the needs in the field. So we're working with the community in the shelters, and where we're finding the needs are. So we're training volunteers, responding with food, water, the basic needs at first, and as MHPSS is very important, we're providing session support for the community, group of women, group of children, and we train community volunteers to help the others in the same shelter. So yeah, we had heard a lot of hard stories, a lot of grief, a lot of loss. Like Zainab mentioned about the routine that they lost at least. So we don't lose beloved one only, we lost home, we lost people, lost their routine, lost their job, lost their land, lost their it's the safety. So we don't only lose people, we lose a lot of things. So we grieve on everything that we lose. So this is what, and we created a hotline during the emergency, so anyone can access we're able to access the hotline for online support, for psychological support. So people will experience to support others dealing with anxiety, dealing with the parenting skills, dealing with fake news. Especially this was very famous during the war, so a lot of fake news were highlighting that people should have the information, the right information from the right resources, trustful websites, trustful links, and yeah. So this is mainly what we did as ITRC.
Thanks, Mona. Can I just ask you, because I think it's really interesting. I probably wouldn't think of fake news as psychosocial support. Um, can you explain, what you did and sort of why that was helpful for people?
Yes, fake news can increase the anxiety, the uncertainty, the stress of people displaced. They are in a tough condition, in a situation that they are not home, they don't feel safe. They are waiting. If they lost their home, it's still there. It's not. They check the map. It's my home here, not so. So when when they received the fake news, they were distressed and anxious all the time until they know the reality that, for example, their home was still there, or their beloved one are still alive, and we had a lot of problem in connecting with others, especially people who stayed in the south and in Beirut. So we had a connection problem. So what we ask people to reduce stress and to reduce anxiety, avoid the fake news, avoid watching 24/7 following the news. So try as much as possible to limitate your social media time, your TV time, and take your information from a trustful sites or from trusted TVs.
Yeah, and Annie, but I will jump briefly to mention that
Please.
this was very much emerging in our stories. And one thing that was prominent during the war was the fake evacuation threat. One of our participants, Hassan, mentioned a story about that. And you could see the situation of chaos and anxiety that happens after that. Imagine like you are receiving a threat that your place is going to be bombed. So you could feel people were in a constant state of anxiety all the time, always on alert mode, and this weighs so much on their mental health.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I need to get off social media. Like in a regular time, it's probably a good idea for all of us to spend less time on our phones. In this particular situation, it was so heightened. I can only imagine. Jasmine, I'll let you again introduce yourself, but I know some of your research does touch on the mental health needs of some of the most vulnerable groups in society who were displaced, including queer IDPs, Syrian refugees, migrant workers. Can you just tell me a bit about yourself and what you saw coming out of your research?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the space. To be involved in any way in this wonderful project has been great. My name is Jasmine. I'm the director of the Institute for Migration Studies at the Lebanese American University, and also an assistant professor and coordinator of migration studies at our department. Much of the research we carried out at the Institute across the last year was on this point of mental health, I think very pertinent, was to unpack the different groups of people impacted. We saw a lot in the humanitarian space, numbers being floated around about who was displaced, how many people were displaced, etc. While, of course, valuable and very important for us to have numbers in a country where we don't do numbers very well, it's also very important for us to unpack these groups across their individual and specific experiences. And much of our research uncovered specific mental health strains and challenges along those lines. And while I am not a mental health expert, our research on intersectionally marginalized groups, their specific experiences and plights with displacement, always threw us in the direction of a mental health conversation. So whether we're speaking about Syrian refugees and Palestinian refugees in Lebanon that have endured their own experiences with armed conflict to varying extents and at different points, we're talking about their re-traumatization. They use words to us like PTSD, anxiety, etc. And while, of course, they are probably not too technical on exactly what they're experiencing, from a professional standpoint, they are able to vocalize that this war impacts them differently. If we're looking at other marginalized groups, not just across legal status or nationality, if we're looking at persons with disabilities, if we're looking at the LGBT community, and then the LGBT community, mind you, across Lebanese, Syrian, Palestinian, and other nationalities as well, their encounters with displacement were certainly traumatic, regardless of what region they came from. So whether they came from the south or were displaced once again in Beirut, their experiences when it came to access to services, to mental health support, to absolutely anything in between is 10 times more challenging, a million times more challenging than the mainstream groups that the humanitarian space focuses on. So for a queer Syrian refugee displaced from the south to Beirut and then again inside Beirut. This is simply someone in our research and in our conversations with the humanitarian space, as well as part of these researches, someone that they can only account for to a certain extent, right? So you're accounting for them based on their nationality, what region they're in, but these intersectional conversations remain completely absent from the response. Much of our research is very narrative, it's very storytelling based. We do a lot of qualitative work. If you read any of our work, it's very heavy on narratives and quotes. Academic journals, they don't like us all the time, but we've been able to push back and include that in much of our outputs too. I think important to this conversation on mental health as well is that in our findings, the lack of prioritization of this conversation, let alone, the complexities of who's been displaced, the prioritization of mental health, I mean, it's absolutely detrimental, and especially when the humanitarian space needs to respond to immediate needs. So while the humanitarian space is looking for shelter, protection, cash support, etc., even though health is factored into this, mental health gets thrown to the bottom of the barrel. Relevant to what my fellow panelists were saying also as well, and you, Annie, about the shrinking of the humanitarian space. This is the first program that gets cut. It's the mental health program. We don't have enough money for this. We have other priorities. And so if you couple it with other components that are also cut, like a gender-sensitive response or anything in between, or a response that is sensitive to people that are doubly displaced or have multiple displacement experiences, these are all the things that the humanitarian space, in many cases, when there are budget cuts, say is beyond their capacity. And so much of our work very much centers on bringing those narratives forward. We have been fortunate to be able to present these in humanitarian spaces to humanitarian actors and humanitarian discussants and in working groups as well. Have we seen this translate into actual responses? Maybe at the level of smaller organizations and grassroots organizations. So organizations that focus on the LGBT community specifically, for instance, or organizations that work with migrant domestic workers specifically, but not so much part of the broader response. I think I'll stop there and then, we can circle back.
Thanks. We share an interest and belief that storytelling is important, and it's interesting to hear what happens when you tell the aid community how important it is and how it can be integrated. I know you have some important recommendations which are in the chat if you want to read one of Jasmine's recent pieces on exactly that. Sarah, I'm going to come to you. I feel like Jasmine led into what I wanted to ask you many times. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to ask you to just introduce yourself and explain what your role and what you were doing during the displacement crisis. And also, Jasmine mentioned the impact of cutting or the importance of specific services. And given that you work on mental health or psychosocial support through a gender-specific lens, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what it was like to work with women in Tripoli or Trablus especially during the 3 months. I guess I should say for those listening, there was 3 months from the end of September until the ceasefire at the end of November, which were particularly intense. It started with what's known as, I guess people have just started calling it the pager operation, which is when Israel remotely detonated pagers and other devices that allegedly belonged to Hezbollah members, and then followed extremely heavy bombing and then the ground invasion. So these particular 3 months was when the crisis was at its worst. But let me pass on to you, Sarah. Thanks for joining us, and over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm gonna start with lots of emotions of honor, and I'm really glad to be joining this conversation today because we do really lack such spaces where people from different backgrounds yet combined with the same cause, with the same passion, and with the same care for the societies that they live in, and we're joining the same conversation. We're talking today about mental health. This is something that really warms my heart as a start. Second, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Sarah Mawad. I'm a Palestinian refugee in Lebanon. I work in a gender-based violence department as a protection officer at DRC. My background is in psychology with master's in clinical psychology. I have an extensive experience in MHPSS interventions, from community-based PSS programs to specialized mental health care and mental health counseling. So recently, during the most escalated period in the Israeli war on Lebanon, DRC in the north was doing a very quick response to do an intervention with the displaced communities. So as you all know, Tripoli and North Lebanon in general was the most relatively safe area in Lebanon during like the whole the hot period of these 3 months. So we had a huge and immense amount of displaced people coming here. And what was really interesting that despite despite every sector meeting and despite all the planning that most sectors on a national level were doing prior the escalation, when it really came to the intervention, we really lacked a lot. We really delayed the intervention. It wasn't really the quality that was supposed to be. And I'm speaking on a very sectorial level, not only like on the intervention of my NGO. Like on a sector level, what we've noticed that it had lots of delay, like in responding to the people's needs and welcoming the displaced people in shelters and coordinating sites and dividing the service mapping on the different shelters and sites in the area. Even though in planning things seemed like we have a good plan, like in practice things were really chaotic, of course, because the number of people were even more than they expected. As you said, also some of my colleagues mentioned the cut of funds that were because, as we all know, that Lebanon always live from other trauma to another trauma. So if each crisis that comes with the funding after it, then when the crisis goes, the fund goes with it. So this is a huge problem that we have here. So there weren't really anything that is fully set to respond to these needs. I'm gonna talk from my experience on what we did on the ground. So as we said, I work in the gender-based violence department. Our work was specifically first to do was the rapid need assessment for people who were displaced through the phone or visit them in the shelters across the north. After that, we started providing cash assistance to people who were most vulnerable, not to everyone, like elderlies, people with specific needs, women and men who were have any specific needs of disabilities or any further vulnerabilities. The next step was providing PFA live in the shelters where we did site visits, and we were doing GBV risk assessments, because as we all know, like in times of crisis, the genderless lens is usually overlooked because, again, it is pushed away that this is not a priority now, not taking it in the full broader lens in any intervention. So it was important for us to really assess the safety of women and girls in these shelters regarding privacy, regarding places where they sleep, if they have safe separate rooms or like bathrooms that can be separate for women and men, because in most sites here, not all sites had like separate bathrooms or separate showers for women and men. So we really had to shed the light on these details, because we know in times of crisis, gender-based violence unfortunately increases. because of lots of factors, mainly because like people are in higher stress, they lose the healthy coping mechanisms that used to do, they turn to violence. In addition to the increased vulnerabilities that mostly women and girls face during times of crisis. Our intervention also focused on providing emotional support groups in these shelters after initiating safety and trust with these women and girls. We were able to initiate these groups and start with them. But as I mentioned before in our talk, Annie, that the short period of intervention didn't allow us to finish this set of sessions. And as I said as well, because of the delay in the response that was on a sectorial level, also it contributed to this part. I want to add a small point of view, that adding to Zainab's point, where people, if they were talking about needs to mental health, people were talking about all kinds of problems, about communication problems, about parenting problems, about conflicts between the partners. Yet they are not touching the recent and the most hot trauma, as we say it in psychology, like the most recent thing that is really affecting them. This is really it's not really a bad thing, because it's a good thing that they are actually speaking about anything, about any challenge, about anything that they are facing. But it was really interesting to see how people reacted differently after they were displaced, and you can see that they are really aching, but also they are somehow kind of not really still very comfortable to share this pain and talk about the displacement and loss and grief and all of the big topics and PTSD that we always that always come in mind when we talk about displacement and we talk about war.
Yeah.
If I may also maybe on that point, Annie, I'm so
Please.
sorry to interrupt you, but
No,
yeah,
please do.
adding to what you said, Sarah, I think the context in which also we were conducting research was not a post-conflict context, right? This was unfolding around people. We wanted, of course, to shed light on their plight and their experiences, but we wanted to do that in a very non-re-traumatizing way. And in many cases, as the trauma is unfolding in real time. So for a lot of people to cope with how this displacement experience impacted them, there would need to be time. I mean, there would need to be time for people to sit with their emotions, to understand. When people are in fight or flight mode, it's not really a time for processing exactly how this has impacted you, how this impacts you in the long term, or even, intergenerationally at some point. Yani, for myself, I'm from a small village, very close to the border in the south. And while I was not physically displaced because I don't, reside in that village, family and friends and so many people I care about deeply have been displaced. There are regions in South Lebanon that have been completely annihilated and destroyed. How do you even get to the point where you ask someone what the long-term mental health or even the immediate mental health implications are of that? They are in a situation where they are scrambling to find shelter, looking for whatever a durable solution means for them in these types of circumstances. And so I think what this conversation does is very well is that it really unpacks trauma across the experience, but also factors in storytelling, hopefully in a way that's healing and not re-traumatizing for people as well. We did encounter, in complete transparency, people that felt that us asking them questions was insensitive, right? So it's not that we as social scientists always have this fluffy, wonderful experience where people that are in pain and agony and in displacement multiple times in their lives are so excited to speak to us at our fancy American university so that we can write a journal article. This is not how this usually happens. How we've been able to combat this is to make it as participatory as possible. But we have been respectfully been turned away because people are not ready, to your point again, Sarah, to talk about things. And it is very tricky. We don't want to lose momentum with what we're doing in bringing these stories forward, but there is a lot of consideration that needs to happen on that front. For many people that turned us away, we heard from them at a later stage and they're like, okay, we're ready to talk now. The first time you reached out to us, we were not ready to talk. For many people, yeah, they simply did not want to speak to us. So just again, putting that out there to add to what you're saying, Sarah. Thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Thanks, Jasmine. I mean, I was thinking similarly, Sarah, what you said. I mean, you and Mona both had, probably less than 3 months to really start conversations, which is not very much time. And if we consider the displacement crisis to have only been 3 months, although, and I think we know the crisis is not actually over when you go home. I think it suggests, and maybe it's something we can talk about later as well, sort of what you said earlier about, there's these short-term fundings for short-term grants. Okay, we're going to fund you to deal with mental health right after the Beirut blast, when that could be something that could come up, I don't know, 10 years later. And Sada, actually, I think you mentioned to me that when we were talking earlier, something that I found really interesting, which is that in your experience, Syrian refugees and Palestine refugees who've been in the country much, much longer, in some case, multiple generations, in your case, have been more ready to seek out these services and to talk. And I wonder why you think that is.
Okay, so regarding this very interesting observation, we really see that people who were displaced from the south specifically find it hard to seek help and seek the services that they need, even though they lost their shelter, they maybe lost loved ones. They find it really hard to ask for the help that they needed. And in comparison to other vulnerable groups or communities, we found that communities that were displaced like a long time ago or were refugees like a long time ago for like 10 or plus years were really more comfortable in identifying what they need and asking for it. Part of this was because, as we said, when people weren't really ready to actually identify themselves as I am a displaced person, I am a refugee. This is a very sensitive topic that we should really care about when we approach people who are just getting displaced. The sensitivity that we use, the context that we use to these people. So they really had a hard time in recognizing and admitting that, yes, I lost all of that. Yes, I was displaced. So we didn't we shouldn't really enforce that service on these people, and we shouldn't really neglect all these social contexts that the background of where these people come from. So the first part is that maybe this community is not ready now and they need time, not months, we're talking about years until they are comfortable. And the other parts where they are still just in shock, not admitting and not really recognizing, they're still maybe in denial that I've lost all of that. It's just like a normal reaction to the big losses that they had. So this was pretty an interesting finding that we also faced during our interventions with the newcomers from the Syrian coast. The interventions were really different from the Syrian refugees who were already here 10 and 11 years ago. They still find it, and they have all the right to recognize themselves as refugees, even if the country wants to label them as such. And they would be saying, we're not refugees, we were just displaced from our homes. And to actually put this label on them, which is really, in a way, it's insensitive and in a way inhuman, because this person is still really processing what happened to them and processing the new crises and traumas that they live in and the atrocities that they faced. So this was a very fresh lens for us to consider like the different groups of refugees, even sometimes from the same country, such as Syrians and people who've been living here in Lebanon, for example, like the Palestinian refugees and the Lebanese displaced people. These differences were really obvious for us in the interventions.
And here you're talking about, I mean, I think the latest number I saw is 40,000 people who have fled from Syria to Lebanon since March, when there was massacres of the Alawite community and some ongoing violence. It's interesting. I mean, it's just, you know, the label, even if you think of the beginning of the Syrian war, the word displacement was very political. The word refugee was very political, but we didn't hear it as much from people themselves. So it's interesting to hear the terms that people maybe would prefer to use, and that maybe you don't. It makes sense that you're not ready to talk immediately once something's happened. Zainab, did you want to come in? Yeah,
I want
please.
to jump in because Sarah already touched on this, that it was very hard for people sometimes to ask for help, and there are a lot of factors that play into that, and I can speak from the community like that I come from and the observations that we have. Sometimes people find it hard to ask for psychosocial support specifically because there is a stigma around that. There is the shaming element around that, especially when you come as well from like religion plays into that. Like I will speak about my community, like if you come from a very religious background, not all of them, of course, I'm not generalizing here. It's just the mindset, like the dominant mindset. People would think, why would you seek for an external help for your mental health while you have your faith, for example, that should make you feel at ease and should comfort you? So there is this element. There is the element of shame. Like there is also the element of you survived the war. Many people have lost their homes, they lost their peers, they lost family members, and you are nagging and you want psychosocial support and you are still alive. You know, like as if survival has become something that a privilege that does not allow you to seek other sort of help. So these elements, you could see them really playing into the stories that we have, and also like, if I want to extend more, there is also the factor of the narrative of the war itself, when it comes like from a victory background, being like the victory in winning a war means that you have to be strong and you do not need help and you are happy. So just wanted to add these observations on why people actually do not easily ask for help.
And if I can add something here, that people didn't share the stories because didn't understand what's happening to them emotionally. So how they are feeling and how they are reacting. So what we did in the shelters and in our group support, that explain about emotions, explain about normal reaction, physical, psychological, the cognitive reactions. So yes, sometimes people don't ask for support and they are not ready to ask for help. But when we were providing and we were talking about reactions, when we were highlighting the topic, they find it interesting topics, and they were sharing more and more about their stories and about what they passed through during the escalation and how they left their homes. Yeah, we heard a lot of stories about they left without taking anything, without being prepared to this. Especially people came from the south and Beqa. Yeah.
Thanks, Mona. I'm wondering, for the practitioners among us, it's two of you, something that came up a lot in discussions between Zainab and I when we started working on the Lebanon Displacement Diaries. We did consult a therapist to make sure that the interviews were conducted in a trauma-informed way. And one of the things that came up is, as I'm sure you know, people in Lebanon often use the word PTSD. When there's like a loud sound, they'll be like, "Oh, that's just my PTSD." It's almost become like like a like a joke. Maybe not a joke, but it's just a really common phrase to use. Um, and PTSD implies that there's a post, and in a country like Lebanon, which has had multiple crises and is ongoing, as we know, how do you go about treating that? Does that actually change how you approach your interventions, your psychological support, your therapy, or is it just still you need to have these conversations and let people talk, um, about whatever they want? Mona, maybe I'll bug you first about that one.
Yes, so diagnosis in such situation doesn't matter. What matters is how to help the displaced. For sure, we know that mental health, their mental health is affected. So by exposing individuals to they are exposed for sure their potential traumatic event. But when we provide the access to mental health and we respond to their needs, we decrease the opportunity or the option of suffering, so they can maintain their functionality and their resilience. So here, if we want to diagnose someone with PTSD, they should stay and maintain the symptoms for 1 month. And this is impossible to observe it in a critical situation. So in normal situation, we observe usually the symptom for 1 month. Here we can say yes, people have PTSD, or we can diagnose them with PTSD. But we were preventing the anxiety, the mental health disorders, and by addressing fear, by addressing the sadness, the sleeping problems, the eating problem. So we didn't want to label people. You have an anxiety disorder, you have depression, you have no. What's important the most is how do you feel today, how to react to the situation, how you gonna deal, how you gonna cope with what's coming up, and the uncertainty, how you gonna deal with it, because we at the beginning of the conflict, we didn't know when it ends. So the most important thing is emotions, focusing on emotions, on reactions, and not labeling people. The mental health is important during the conflict and after the conflict. And here we can see the impact needs time to be to see it, or to so we can observe it, yes, but on the spot.
Thank you. I'm struck by the importance of after, during, and after. Given that, for example, Sada, you were working with people who were displaced and you only saw them for a few months, and then many of them went back home, if not to their homes. Lebanon's mental health network is, well, maybe you can describe it better. When people are going back, what options they have to continue treatment, to see a therapist. Let's say somebody wants to see a therapist, because a lot of people may eventually want to do that.
Okay, so I want to add a few points to what Mona was saying, because it's
Please
really
do.
interesting to me, because you mentioned like the PTSD, that the symptoms need to stay for 1 month after the incident or after the crisis happened. Here we don't have an after, because there hasn't been 1 month that no incident happens, because each day we hear there is like a bombing in the south, like a new village that got something, a new threat that happened here. So even now they call the war is over, but technically and to be realistic, the war is not over and we don't have the after. So this is a very important aspect when we take into consideration on interventions that should be done. So on other level, it is really important not to diagnose people during times of crisis, because this is basically reactions. It's reactions, and you see which reaction is the most severe or most intense or most destructive to the people, and you try to de-escalate these reactions and try to maybe introduce healthier coping mechanisms and like more understanding to how their bodies are reacting and help them navigate this, because it's important for the systems to feel these reactions, because it's survival, it's benefiting them, it's actually considered smart ways of survival for the body and for the nervous system. So the whole interactions or set of symptoms that we usually label is important to navigate with care and sensitivity and trauma-informed approaches. So as I was saying, that there is no actually after. So what we do is that we try to make it less intense to them and more you can increase their tolerance maybe to this, and help them cope better for better functionality you can now regarding that they are going back, or maybe in their new homes or shelters, how to coordinate better, communicate better, and maybe they reach to a place where they are ready to actually start unpacking with care. So what we've discussed earlier, Annie, what we really lack here is not just individual therapy sessions, because now on a service mapping level, people who were coming back to the South, there was like a division between the NGOs regarding sectors and regarding areas, and the service mapping regarding each area, as you know. So for example, the people that left, they were in Tripoli under, let's say, DRC, IMC was providing the mental health side, or other NGOs here, maybe MDM. In the South, we have other actors, for example, Intersos, NRC, and other actors as well. So they will be responsible to provide these services. But to see like the real impact and how many people actually asked for these, we don't really have these numbers yet. In addition to that, the sad aspect of this, that if they are providing mental health services now, we really hope that these services don't stop after the war ends, or like the intervention ends for this duration of the project, the cycle ends, because usually this is the way with Lebanon. We are always left after the crisis, after like a very beneficial intervention, we are left with nothing. We are left with no spaces for the communities that are sustainable and that stay for the people, run by the people, like by the locals, and the people themselves responding to their own needs and helping them to empower these safe spaces collectively. Because as we all know, like if one person is facing a crisis, it is a PTSD. If like a whole nation is having a crisis, we have a collective trauma. And to address collective traumas, we need collective solutions. We need collective safe spaces to run these conversations, to really integrate these safe spaces within these areas, addressing the needs of the people, the context that these people live in, not imposed by whatever curriculum this NGO finds suitable that is practicing now, or what the donor wants, or what this sector wants. So this is, for me, this is like the most ideal way to do the best interventions in this way, is really to create safe spaces for people that is empowering them to run these places, even after the NGO stops, or like the project gets cut, as we really heard in the recent phases.
Thank you. I mean, project cuts certainly something that I know many of you are facing. I was going to sort of ask everyone how that's impacting them. And Sada, I feel like I have your suggested solution as to what should come next. Mona, maybe since you work at a big organization as well, could you talk a little bit about sort of the impact of cuts on mental health? And I'm also curious maybe to hear from all of you. I think one of these things that comes up is, we talk to people and they say, well, we have to cut something and we're not going to cut food and we're not going to cut shelter. So why is it that mental health matters? Maybe I could hear from you on how the cuts have impacted on the ground, and also why you feel that. Well, I mean, obviously you feel it's important, but why
Yes.
is it important if you're here today?
Yes, regarding the ICRC work, and as I mentioned before, multidisciplinary approach. So it's not only food, only water, only health. Mental health is important as well. Yes, we are affected by the cut like other organization, but we saved some budget for mental health, and what we're trying to do to build the capacity of the community to help them to for more sustainability, and not only we are implementing the active. So usually we implement and we train people so they can help each others, and they can help with parenting skills, for example, how we do a peer-to-peer support, we do for healthcare workers, for the community. So in this way, we can ensure the sustainability of our program, the sustainability of our activities, and of what we're doing. In this way, the budget needed is not much as before. And yes, sure, and that conflict, we receive a lot of money. We have a lot of donors who were willing to support, but unfortunately, in some cases, we have the cut. So yeah, what we're doing is always in ICRC, we're looking at the sustainability. At some point, we need to do an exit strategy and to go out of the community. So building their capacity, the strategy, the smartest strategy that we use, especially in a country has lack of services in mental health, lack of fund. The MOPH, they don't, in some cases, they don't have enough resources to support. And after the economic crisis, we have a lot of professional workers left the country. So we have lack of professionals, of psychiatrists in the country. So yeah. This is the way. So preventing the mental illnesses and the psychotic illness. This ensure that people can be and they can still have their well-being and being functional in their community and in their roles. Yeah.
Thank you. It strikes me that the sort of project-based approach, or when you come in and fund during a crisis, and as Sada and I think many of us have said, when it never really ends, that isn't particularly sustainable unless you are also, as you mentioned, Mona, building capacity, setting up systems where people can help themselves, because healthcare, particularly mental health care, although actually healthcare in general can be out of reach for many people in Lebanon right now. To get maybe a bit more personal, only to the extent that you guys are comfortable, of course, but I think we are hoping to learn some lessons for other crises and in other contexts. And you know, one of the things that strikes me when we were in our conversations before this call and during this call, and frankly, during everything that happened, that the people who are helping are also the people who are suffering, who are either displaced themselves, or their family is displaced, or their community or is displaced, or their country is, as you said, suffering almost a national trauma, Sarah. You know, I don't want to pick on anyone, but I'm wondering how, not just for aid workers, but also for storytellers like Zainab, or researchers like Jasmine, or people who are some way involved in helping, how the aid world or we can better support you during and after crises like these. You know, what does it mean when the people who are helping also need help themselves, because you are humans who are going through this? Who did anybody want to volunteer, or shall I pick on you for
I
that
think I'll
really hard
volunteer to
question?
go first because
Love
I'll
it.
be the shortest.
Okay.
But I mean, no, definitely. I think as you consider yourself maybe the outlet for people to discuss and describe what they're feeling with you, and also maybe responsible for putting the stories out there. Much of what we hear is first and foremost incredibly painful to listen to and very emotionally and psychologically taxing in quote unquote normal times, whatever that means, again, you know, pertinent to this conversation in Lebanon. As you're experiencing it unfold around you, and you know of family members that are stuck in certain places or that refuse to leave their homes and they're in sites of danger. We all have lost very close friends in the humanitarian space, and you know, friends and family. It's interesting because you are then, I think, forced to reflect and look into yourself around your positionality as a researcher. How much are you implicated in this conversation? But then again, how much do you recognize your privilege in being able to also do the work that you do? So it is a constant uphill battle and a lot of navigating, at least on our part at the Institute, as to not only how we frame this, but how we even discuss internally when a team member has a really difficult interview that they've conducted and they're feeling very strained about it. We do a lot of unpacking and debriefing together. And again, I have students and affiliates at our institute and graduate assistants that were supporting us with our research that were displaced themselves from their homes around Beirut and in Dahye, that would come every day from the south to be in class, which I found absolutely remarkable, even though, you know, they had not been asked to do this. And so I think it's a back and forth around how each of us is really coping with it. I wouldn't go as far as to say that I could understand or even compare the pain that I'm feeling personally to that of the individuals that I'm speaking to. But we all definitely experienced it to a certain extent. And I think the problem is the recurrent cycle of it. So, as someone in my 30s, I've at least been part of this conversation twice. My parents have been part of it at least 3 or 4 times, right? If you have grandparents, this is maybe what, the seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th war that they're going to live through, or armed conflict that they're going to live through. As someone from the South, people are, interestingly enough, you know, to your point, Zainab, around framing resilience, you know, as something positive, but also something very painful. People that live with a go bag in their living room forever because they anticipate that this could happen at any point, right? So a lot of the coping mechanisms and what we heard helped us as well understand a lot of it and position ourselves as researchers. And I think positionality in the way we analyze our data and how we digest it and interpret it came up as part of this conversation. But I think that's only my 2 cents on that. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Jasmine. Zainab, you wanted to jump in?
I'll jump next. Actually, thank you for this question, because as Mona and Sarah were talking, like I was just thinking to myself, how can they do it? Like Mona was displaced, Sarah is Palestinian, like they are inside, outside at the same time. They are the focal point for the people. And suddenly the funding cuts, and then they have to explain to the people, or they are, because you know the people that we work with do not understand this bureaucratic dynamic of funding. They don't care about it, and then you are the person to explain that. And we are a human at the end of the day. Like it's really emotionally hard to keep this like boundary between me as a person and me as ما بعرف mental health practitioner or a storyteller. So this is something that I still struggle with, and Annie, you know better than anyone. That's why maybe I don't call myself a journalist, because I'm someone who deeply gets involved in the lives of the people that I actually meet. And I don't think that this is a negative aspect, while many people might think so. But for me, the ethical consideration comes like when I first start talking to the people, I am very clear about who I am and what my role is and what I can offer and what I can't offer. But what happens after that, it's pretty much like I don't mind. It actually gives me satisfaction when, like, the people that I met, like, to build a connection with, to become friends, to become, if they invite me for a visit, I would go for that happily. This actually helps me to continue doing this work, because I'm not disappearing after that. Yeah, I'm collecting your story. We are trying to create the meaning of this story together and bring it out to the world. But I am not disappearing like a lot of like the funding and NGOs does, like, you know, you work on the ground and then you disappear. And this really goes back to a personal choice and the capacity of every person. But for me, this helps me to stay strong and doing this work to build a human connection with the people that I collect the stories from. Because as Jasmine said, like, many people would turn you down, and this is their right, because people have this story fatigue. Like, many researchers, many journalists go there and enter their lives and just tell me your story. I don't want to tell my story to anyone, you know, like, it's a lot of emotional effort. So it's only fair for us not to disappear and remember that we are all humans, regardless of whether we are journalists, whether we are mental health practitioners. And to me, the most important element was debriefing, actually, as well, after every story, because Annie knows better, like, her WhatsApp with the voice notes, either crying or either being happy. Like, it's important for me to share what I heard and my reflections on that. It really helps me to digest what is happening. And for me, the comfort was through that. Of course, every experience is different, but we could all, like me and the 10 participants, share bits of experience. Like, I could understand what they are saying. They could understand what I was saying as well. So that was really comforting for me, and hopefully for them. So, yeah.
Thanks, Zainab. Mona,
For me,
please.
yes. So in the ICRC, for sure, we acknowledge the importance of supporting healthcare workers. So we developed, we have a program called Help the Helpers. We support healthcare workers, emergency medical services, first responders, on how to deal with the stress and how to cope and how to take care of themselves. As a professional, for sure, we have our role is to manage others' pain, even in the normal situation and every day. This is our job. But in the for sure, we're affected. I was affected. My colleagues were affected. It was not easy to gain the routine, but we did as much as possible to maintain our healthy routine, healthy habits, and continue working. Because, as Zainab mentioned, we believe that people needs us now, and we should be functional. So the ICRC has staff healthcare that we can access, and we can ask for the support whenever we want as a professional and healthcare workers. And sometimes we ask for outside support from a professional, a clinical psychologist, who can help us as a professional and help the team to maintain and to keep doing our role in a very professional and objective way.
Thanks, Mona. I've been weaving in questions from the audience without secretly. I'm gonna pop in another one if that's okay, which is someone has asked, when it comes to the internal displacement of people in Lebanon, did you guys recognize any difference in the mental health situations? And I think by this they mean perhaps the way people presented, the way they wanted to talk, what they were experiencing of people depending on their socioeconomic backgrounds. I think in this case, in Lebanon, this can mean several things. For those who know Lebanon, I think the vast majority of the people displaced were from the south, which means they were Shia, and they were often going to parts of the country that were not. For example, Tripoli, maybe Sara, you can jump on this, which is a Sunni majority city. I'm wondering if how that played out in your work, if it's something you're comfortable talking about, of course.
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. So allow me to expand here on. Yes, as we were saying, the most of the displaced people, they were from the south, they were Shia, and they were mostly displaced to relatively safe places in the north, which is a majority of Sunnis. One of the challenges, going back to the challenges that maybe hindered people to ask for help and actually be comfortable in and navigating mental health services, was the fear of discriminated against, the fear of discrimination. Because number one, some people, we heard this from like several people. It was their first time coming to the north for their whole lifetime, like let's say for 30 or 40 years old. It's the first time that they see Tripoli, they see Mina, and they see the people here. They thought this is a city of terrorism and like a very strict religious groups of Sunni and Daesh, because this is what the media usually portrays Tripoli. And they had huge fears when they came here, but this was really faced by something that was the contrary, because people really, in my own observation, were really able to put these differences aside and were really able to act on that humanitarian urge to help. Because I saw lots of local initiatives of friends that I know from the city. They were running day and night. They were like, we were having collaboration groups and coordination groups of volunteers only that were running to shelters and people staying in houses and like trying to find mattresses and very basic things and very like humble donations that were collecting from the people that they know in the city. It was really heartwarming and it was really touching to see this embrace. يمكن they really defeated the whole narrative of when you go to the north, people will reject you, people will يمكن do further harm on you. So we also do understand that people were preservative on their stories and their safety considerations. They still didn't feel safe yet, maybe to unfold everything, because they also have all the right, because they were still in new communities that they don't know a lot about. Some of the people displaced here still had relatives, brothers or fathers who were still fighting in the south and the resistance. So this was also very critical to get to them in a way of protection, that we cannot portray ourselves as like weak or people who are collapsing or that we need help, because again, we're coming to the resilience, we are resilient, we don't collapse. Also, I was having this interesting conversation with you, Annie, as we said, and sometimes we really need to follow the trauma-informed approaches, and sometimes you cannot ask people to collapse in the wrong time, because now they are in survival mode, now because they are still losing loved ones, now they are still a responsibility for protection of this country. So sometimes you cannot really force people to go out from the survival mode and now you are safe, you can unpack, you can talk about things. No, they're not safe yet. they're afraid if a name was leaked that Israel may target it because it was يمكن on WhatsApp or an Excel sheet that went يمكن to some of the NGOs. We don't know. So they had lots of considerations that we really understood and we really took in our approach. And this is very an important topic to tackle because I remember when we were going to one of the shelters, one of the site managers who was also displaced, he asked me, what are you going to do? I said, we're going to do emotional support groups for women and girls. And he was like, do you know the women and girls here, they teach you and people like you how to be resilient, and they can support the bunch of you here. They can teach you lessons and resilience and psychosocial support. These words still ring in my ear until now because I know these people, of course, they were grieving, they were afraid, they were experiencing loss, but now they want to protect themselves and they have all the right to do that. And it's our responsibility to keep this humanitarian eye of taking the context of what these people are passing through and to simply respect it.
Thanks. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's probably easy, and this is maybe a lesson for all of us as we're coming closer to the end of this conversation, but not done just yet, that the local context is, I mean, you guys know this because you work in it, but when you're planning, you can't just bring a project in that's been planned somewhere else for a different context and expect it to work. And quite frankly, I think it's also interesting to hear, the narrative of sectarian division in Lebanon is a stereotype and a cliche, and it's often it's both true and not true, right? I mean, there are differences and there are divisions. They're important to acknowledge both from a sensitivity perspective to understand where people are coming from, but also, as Zainab, as your research or our project showed, and as all of you, I think, who either were displaced or are working with displaced people saw, there was also a lot of people helping across sectarian, across religious lines, trying their best to do what they could. Zainab, in the project, there were people who came from Christian backgrounds, and I think ended up in a Druze village, and they found, there's people they had never come in contact before, and now I think they were talking about starting a business together, which was really nice to hear. It just absolutely cuts across everything that you would hear if you read or listen to the news in Lebanon. I guess there's one more question from the audience, which is a bit more practical, and this is a hard one. So I don't know if it's answerable even, but it's basically that in Lebanon, what practical resources are available for those who might not be aware of them for mental health support? I know there's some hotlines. Is there still resources available, or have a lot of them dried up because the crisis is over? Mona, I know, or Jasmine, go ahead.
No, I mean, just very quickly, I think for respondents in a study that we have ongoing at the moment, all gender-sensitive responses to the last couple of years have dried up quite extensively. And mental health support services on a large scale, large nationwide programs at that level are no longer realized in our understanding. We have found pockets of support for certain groups, the queer community, multiple local organizations that work very closely with them, predominantly Mosaic at the moment, providing psychosocial support and health support. They do that in quite a wonderful way. I know local refugee-led organizations as well, quite a few to name, work with very specific community groups in specific regions, as well as with the Palestinian community in camps as well. And for migrant domestic workers, I am aware of at least 3, 4 organizations at the moment that are led by different migrant groups, so the Filipino group, the Ethiopian group, etc., that do provide psychosocial support services as well. But mind you, this is a band-aid on a larger problem because these are often enough the organizations that struggle the most with securing sustainable funding. They are the ones with the most limited resources, and their resources that they do have rely on larger organizations that then rely on donors. So it's not that they are not impacted by this cycle that everyone has been describing. It is simply that they are moving funds around that they currently have to target mental health based on the needs of the communities they serve. How long this will be able to go on relies heavily on donor support and the intervention of larger actors as well. Having said that, a lot of these organizations, as well as part of a rapid needs assessment that we continue to do, had a lot of funding promised that was then, based on the executive order from the US, either halted in its tracks. The money never got to these organizations, or they received a small portion of it. And then what happens is absolutely what we've been discussing as part of a larger trend. They allocate as much as possible for that from that fund towards mental health, but they need to stretch the money through towards other things like shelter and protection and cash, etc. So this is at least in our findings as we continue to do the needs assessment where things stand. But I'm sure my fellow panelists would have more tangible responses to that.
Thanks, Jasmine. I mean, I think unfortunately, the practical answer is there are not enough resources for people seeking mental health support. I know that in our other conversations, and especially as we're wrapping this up, that while a lot of people, maybe weren't comfortable speaking about their immediate traumas, the issue of stigma and mental health support certainly exists in Lebanon as it does in other places, but it's also a bit of a stereotype. I know a lot of people called the hotline, Mona, that you guys run, saying, I do want help. I need help. And that's important also to recognize. This is not necessarily a situation where people don't know what they need. They know what they need, and it's not always there. And that is something that we maybe in the aid world, outsider looking into the aid world, need to acknowledge. I feel like all of us could probably talk for several days. I hope we will, maybe just not online while we're being filmed. And I have the responsibility to wrap this up, unfortunately, because I want to continue this conversation. But I guess just to close, if we want to think about Lebanon and other displacement, and I should say, I think protracted crises, because Lebanon, those 3 months and that entire year is not the entire story. The theme of the Lebanon Displacement Diaries was that the end of the war is not the end of a story. And this is true in many places, especially if you put the word end maybe in quotation marks, as you mentioned before. I hope that those of us here and those of us listening, some of my takeaways from what you all have said is that it's time to start thinking from short-term solutions to and funding to using a longer-term lens. And it's important who actually plans this, who's heard, who's listened to, who's empowered when it comes to the people who are receiving the services also need to be involved in the planning of these services and in the provision of these services. And, from my perspective, it's important for all of us to reflect on why mental health is really thrown to, as one of you said, I think Sada, is thrown to the bottom of the barrel. Why is that the first to go? What does that mean about us as humans, as whatever sector we work on? I mean, that's something we need to consider, because at the end of the day, those people who are providing these services are the same people who need these services, are the same people. This is a cycle that goes on and perpetuates itself, and something I think we need to really be wary of. I want to thank you all, Sada, Mona, Jasmine, and Zainab, for joining us, for sharing your personal experiences and your professional experiences. I think that your insights have given our audience a lot to think about, and we'll continue to think about. From our perspective, from the Lebanon Displacement Diaries and the New Humanitarian, we are aiming to sort of continue this conversation about displacement and the way this continues to impact people far after sort of the cameras and the headlines have moved on. So, I guess watch this space being the New Humanitarian, for more on that as we go forward, and hopefully help people find more spaces to share their own stories and Yeah, I think I've talked now already way too much, but thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for joining, for your questions, and for your time this afternoon. I really appreciate it.
Thank
you so much,
you.
Thank
everyone.
you so much.
It was a
I think I
pleasure
ended this.
having you all.
Yeah, no, we now have a whole minute to talk. I can't believe I did this, that I wrapped it up early. I'm just always scared of finishing like right at the second, and then it cuts somebody off when they're saying the most the most insightful thing they've ever said. So now the audience can just watch us before they cut it off. But no, seriously, thank you guys for
Thank
joining.
you.
I
Thank you.
feel very honored to be in the company of such smart, thoughtful women. People.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah.
Have a
Hard
wonderful
hands.
evening, everybody.
Hard
Bye.
hands back at you, Zainab.
Bye.
Tara, yes.